Hey guys, I am creating this podcast today to honor my dad, honor me, and honor our story together. I'll highlight the impact of abuse, the power of forgiveness, and the sovereignty of God. I'm glad to invite you into more of my story. My name is Jason Mellard. I am a certified high-performance coach, writer, and the founder of Own Your Identity. I'm committed to empowering men to live beyond their unwanted same-sex attractions and into their purpose through the power of Christ and for the glory of God. In the story of me and my dad, there may be experiences or themes that you can relate to. I believe the more we share our stories, the less ammunition the enemy has to convince us that we're separate or alone. This episode, which includes mention of sexual abuse and suicide, it may trigger strong emotion. If this is you, feel free to reach out to me or somebody else to process it. I'm grateful to be in a place where I can reflect on my abuser without anger. But if you have been abused, I want to honor wherever you may be in your healing journey. And trust me, I've gotten pissed off at my dad many times, and I likely will again. I've cried a lot. So here it goes. When I was 7 years old, I told my mom, I hate Dad. He was a force I could never match. He consistently broke my spirit. She replied, You're not supposed to hate your dad. That comment stumped me. I thought to myself, but I do. I do hate my dad. I hated him for coming into my bed at night and using me in ways I didn't understand. I hated him for overpowering me with his physical strength. I hated him for shutting me out emotionally in response to trivial things. I hated him most for inspiring the lies that I didn't have a voice, a right to my own body, a certainty that somebody had my back, or a unique value to offer the world. When I sang a song on a road trip, he sang it louder until my voice was drowned out. When I showed excitement for writing, photography, art, computers, math, more, he communicated, good luck. When I voiced my discomfort with his sinful touch, he withdrew all affection. When we wrestled, I got squished. Squished, yeah, that's actually a pretty good description of what I felt most often when I was with him. I felt small. I felt alone. My dad, he felt the same as a child. His father didn't know what to do with his oldest son, who was sensitive and disinterested in watching the football games that played across the two TVs in their living room each Sunday. On one day, my grandfather had tickets to a live game. He heard a scream through the front window. He walked outside to see blood gushing from my dad's cheek that was ripped open by a branch as he had fallen from a tree. What were you doing? His father said. Now we're going to miss the game. My dad looked up in pain at the disappointment and anger in his father's eyes. That anger was present despite the rip in my dad's face. My dad shared that story when I asked where that long scar on his cheek came from. That shameful scar, which reminded my dad he was a bother. Every time he looked in the mirror, he was deficient and wrong. And if he lacked further evidence that he was deficient or wrong, he could focus on the story that he told himself about his same-sex attractions. They were a part of his life that he had to keep hidden. He could never be fully known. He believed he was different. When his dad described the intimate details of the affair that he was having, my dad, who was navigating puberty and focused on guys, couldn't relate. Something must be wrong with him. When he stood at attention in the Navy, he hoped his uniform and stoic face would hide his attractions. After he felt a genuine call to the ministry and brought his family across the country to Dallas for seminary, he was disappointed when his attractions didn't diminish as he immersed himself in the study of God's Word. When he was overwhelmed by the politics he experienced when pastoring a small Baptist church, his secret became his solace. He retreated into his bedroom, shutting out his son, daughter, and wife to decompress with gay porn. And just as he was puzzled by his dad's preference for football over time with him, I never understood why my dad locked himself away from me. Whatever was on the other side of that door must have been pretty amazing, more than me. Over time, my dad's porn use deepened, and he began acting out with other guys. Eventually, his sins caught up with him. When I was 14, I watched from the elevated sound booth at the back of the church as my dad tightened his grip on the pulpit to keep his hands from trembling. His voice shook. He cut the sermon short and asked a deacon to close in prayer. Before the prayer ended, my dad was out the church doors, never to return. From a sea of confused faces milling about the foyer, a woman stopped me and said, "Jason, there's something wrong with your dad." I wanted to defend him, but I had no clue what to do. Our lives would change forever. My sister and I stayed with friends for a week while my parents took a road trip. My dad wanted to put distance between him and the pain. He tried to explain his attractions to my mom. "It's like electricity going through my body," he said. "I don't know what to do." He cried in her arms. He checked himself into a mental hospital and joined a 12-step group. He became open about his struggles and pain. His example would be a gift to me when I had a nervous breakdown at the end of college, and I was encouraged by him to start recovery work. I give him credit for that. My mom stayed by his side. She didn't know what else to do, and she loved him. But I watched her waste away with anxiety, drinking a protein shake to intake calories. My sister got her license and was out late each night. My dad's door began to close again, and I was alone. No longer able to live in the parsonage and unable to afford a house in the same town, which had become affluent over the years, we moved into an apartment in the city. I entered 9th grade, knowing no one. I was a shell, walking into the windowless school. I put on my protective smile and ensured my hair was in place. It landed me a spot at the popular table at lunch, but I sat with nothing to say, amazed at the carefree spirits of the other students. The guys who exuded confidence especially intrigued me. How is that possible? I didn't last a week at that table. Guys became a mystery to me as they had to my dad. When I neared high school graduation and a classmate said he wanted to kiss me, I felt the same electricity my dad had described. Throughout college, my dad and I had an off-and-on relationship. Afterwards, as I came to grips with the abuse I experienced and received support, I decided I wanted to actively work to deepen and restore our relationship. I didn't have to, but I wanted to. But the abuse was a wall, a big wall, and we had never discussed it. In a support group for male survivors of abuse, I had an opportunity to role play confronting my dad. I received strength and care from the group and made plans to meet my dad at a park. I waited with trepidation until we stood face to face. Then I shared everything I could remember with him in detail. I shared how I felt and how I believe it impacted my beliefs about myself, God, and how I showed up in the world. He owned it all, was sorrowful, and shared other examples of neglect that he was sorry for. And that was a big step for both of us. Afterwards, we connected more often, and while I still kept it surface level, I enjoyed a more relaxed relationship. Several months later, he called to get my opinion on something. He said, "Jason, I'd like to hang out with gay people. I want to express that side of myself." I was caught off guard, and I asked him to tell me more. He just felt something was missing from his life. He wanted to let his guard down and just be himself. He and I, at the time, were both navigating our same-sex attractions. I wanted to marry a woman, but I wasn't sure how it would be possible due to my lack of arousal towards them. He had a marriage that didn't satisfy him. During that year, I joined a support group for guys who desired to live according to values and goals that were not in line with their same-sex attractions. My parents ended their marriage of 36 years. My dad went into the gay lifestyle. I grieved the loss of my family as I had always known it, as imperfect as it was. I expressed my hurt to my dad. I told him I loved him, but I also told him that I felt abandoned. I needed to say that so I could keep a wall from being built in my heart. My dad entered the lifestyle, and he was happy. He told me, I feel closer to God than I ever had. He could breathe. But that euphoria was short-lived. He withdrew from us and turned away from the faith. How could a God who made me this way condemn me for it? He said. Soon, he went dark. He bought an RV and lived with his partner, Chan, at various campsites and parks in the area. He changed his phone number and email. He vanished from social media. We had no way to contact him. I would see the back of his bald head at the mall, but realized once he turned that it wasn't him. I questioned whether it would hurt less if he was dead. At least then I would know that his disappearance wasn't a choice. 3 months before he died, at the age of 69, he reached out to me. He was hurting. Panic attacks were frequent. He apologized for breaking contact and wanted to talk with me every day. He came to the house to visit my wife and daughter, and he didn't rush off. He shared his renewed belief in Christ. He invited me to spend the day at Six Flags amusement park with him. That was our safe place together as a family growing up. He was always happy there, and we were too. We carpooled from my house. Because he was a big man, I assumed that we would drive in his truck. But he opted to fit himself into my 2-door sports car. I think he was glad just to let me take the wheel. We enjoyed walking the park. We rode side by side in the old-timey cars. We shared a funnel cake, which is our favorite. But while we latched into the seats of the Titan roller coaster, bracing for the steepest drop in the park, he felt a sharp pain in his jaw. He had recently drained some of his limited savings, having work done on it. His mind went to the unknown depth of expense which might be incurred again. His mood changed. He was somber as we waited in line for another ride, and he said to me something unexpected. Jason, leaving your mom was the worst decision I've made in my life. I didn't know what to say, except, I'm sorry, Dad. I gave him a big hug. It's got to be so hard. Over the next 2 weeks, his panic attacks increased. He shared concerns over money. His boyfriend, Chan, and I sat across the table in his tiny living room and assured him that we were going to take care of him. He shook his head. No. Days later, I got a call from his neighbor. Jason, you need to go to the hospital. When I arrived, I learned he was sedated in an operating room. As they stitched his neck and wrists, they placed charcoal in his stomach to counteract the bottle of pills that he had ingested. He never came to. We went with Chan and gathered some of his belongings from the RV. When we opened some cupboards, we found them filled with porn. Apparently, it was still a solace. His partner shared the details of his final day. Something was off with the way my dad said goodbye that morning, lingering in the doorway as Chan left for work. He cut his workday short and returned home. Chan walked in and saw my dad standing there with a red knife in his hand. My dad said, I have to die. I'll be broke in a month. Chan said, that's not true. And he ran next door to get their neighbor. We had wanted my dad to believe that he wasn't alone. We wanted him to believe that we had his back, but he didn't believe us, or he didn't believe he deserved our help. He had hurt a lot of people. Who knows? And my dad did hurt people, but so have I. My dad reached for lesser things. So have I. My dad remembered that Christ reaches for us, and he is the only one that can make us whole. That is true for all of us. I miss him. I missed him being here when my son was born, when I started my coaching business, and when I've taken my family to Six Flags without him. I want my messy dad back, too, my messy life. Whether you have been deeply hurt or have hurt other people deeply, I want you to know that you are not alone. Thank you for honoring me and my dad by listening to our story. God bless.